Reading the Bible is like hiking through wild, breathtaking terrain, and a good guide makes all the difference. They know the twists and turns, the hidden wonders, and the best views. That's why today we're talking with a biblical scholar to help us understand, enjoy, and apply God's Word. Hello, and welcome to a special bonus episode of the Bible Savvy Podcast. I'm Clayton Keenan, and today we are going to be talking about how to understand, enjoy, and apply the books of Judges and Ruth. And before we get started, I want to give you a little warning here. We are going to be talking about stories that involve some pretty intense stuff, including extreme violence and sexual assault. We won't get too graphic, but it's in there. So if this isn't something you're ready for right now, this may be one you want to skip. On this episode, we're joined by Dr. Sandra Richter. Dr. Richter is the Robert H. Gundry Chair of Biblical Studies at Westmont College, and she is a returning guest to the podcast. If you didn't hear our last interview with her that we did about the book of Deuteronomy, it is well worth going back to hear that. Even if we're not reading Deuteronomy, there was so much good stuff in there. I think you'll really appreciate it. I regularly recommend her books, especially The Epic of Eden. It's one of my go-to books for people who are trying to figure out, how do I understand the Old Testament? Really, really helpful. And the reason we've brought Dr. Richter back is because we're about to start reading the book of Judges. And right after that, we're going to read the book of Ruth. And she has published studies on Deborah, who is one of the judges, and the book of Ruth. And she knows a lot about these things. So I thought talking to her would be great for us getting our heads and our hands around these books. So Dr. Richter, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, it is great to be here. Well, I love the fact that I'm a repeat visitor.
Oh, yeah, we do too. It seems to be great to be where you are. The climate looks a lot better than it does around here.
Yeah, and this is Santa Barbara, California, the land where it's always sunny, which means that about 60% of my Midwest New England wardrobe is now completely obsolete. And my big coat, you've got the little coat and you have the big coat. My big coat sits lonely in the coat closet, collecting dust until, I pack it in a suitcase somewhere.
Oh, well, we'll have to have an excuse to have you out in February or something, just for old times.
Okay.
And well, you don't get the colors, so we'll hold that over you, that you don't have fall colors.
Well, and as we were saying in the prelim to our podcast, the number one thing I miss about living in Southern California is there's no fall. Yeah. There's no autumn. And for years, like 3 or 4 years, it took me where I finally realized I can wait forever and fall is not coming. It's just not coming.
Your soul waits for it, but it's never there. It's never there. All right, let's jump in. Let's start with some context here. Situate for us Judges and Ruth in the storyline of the Bible, kind of chronologically. Where does it fit?
Yeah, first of all, I love the fact that that's where you start, because so many people don't. So chronologically, it falls in between the Exodus and the monarchy. And the Exodus and the monarchy are big highlights for the standard student of the Old Testament. Okay, we know about Moses. We know about liberating the slaves. We get all the way to Mount Sinai with Prince of Egypt. And then what happens next, right? And the next time we emerge or come up for air, David's on the throne and we all live happily ever after. Well, in between is the settlement era. And we call it the conquest and the settlement, where Moses turns his authority over to Joshua. Joshua leads the campaign into the promised land. And our team, over the course of probably a couple of 100 years, actually takes control of the promised land. It is not some quick blitzkrieg, as so many people want to present it. It takes a long time. And during that time, Israel is led by their tribal leaders. And this is a tribal confederacy. This is a decentralized government. So we've got 12 tribes, 12 tribal sheikhs. They all have their own territories. They live very separate lives, and they like it that way. And they get along about as well as all of the princes of the Saudi tribes get along, or as all of the Highland chieftain clan leaders of old Scotland got along. It's like, you stay on your side of the line and I'll stay on my side of the line, and it'll be okay. So that's the era that we're in.
Okay, so let's talk about the name of this book here. It's called Judges, and in my mind, when I read the word judge, I have something immediately that comes to mind: black robe, gavel, behind a bench, someone's in trouble, that sort of thing. But that is not what that depicts in the biblical terminology here. So help us understand exactly what does the Bible mean that the whatever word we translate as judge, and tell us a little bit about the social context where that would exist.
Yeah. So again, we're in this settlement period, which runs somewhere between 1300 and 1000. That's where we are, BC. And the word shofet is the word for judge. And it is a really unfortunate word for the American reader because everyone pictures exactly what you've just described. Whereas in reality, most of these judges come into their public office by being very charismatic military leaders. So think back to that description of our Highland clans in Scotland or our Saudi princes. And what takes place on a regular basis is that Israel will be threatened by some sort of foreign power, and we need to unite the tribes, unite these volunteer tribal battalions in order to defend Israel against their opponent. And that's what the judge is doing. And when I say charismatic, yes, there is the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, but perhaps even more important, there is this reputation, kind of like a William Wallace of Scotland, saying that, yes, indeed, we will unite behind this man. We respect and admire this man. And so we'll commit our military force to his effort.
So this book is a series of those figures. It's kind of structured around that. So as we read through Judges, give us kind of a 30,000-foot view in terms of themes. What should we be looking for? What kind of message is going on in the big picture of this book?
Yeah, the first thing we need to look for is a 12-part cycle. And you and I both know that the Bible has certain stylized numbers that it really likes. Yeah, we have 3s, 10, 3, 7, 10, 12, and 40. We have 12 tribes. We have 12 disciples, and we have 12 judges. And these 12 cycles of the judge stepping up to lead the united tribes is the structure of the book. Now, does that tell us that there were only 12 judges? No. But there are 12 cycles that are represented in the book to give us that 3,000-foot view of what's going on in Israel's experience during this time. So we've got these 12 cycles. Each cycle has a very similar pattern, although what we're going to see is that this cycle is swirling downward as well. So how does that cycle typically go? As Yahweh promised his people, this land is your land as long as you keep my covenant. As long as you keep my covenant, I will defend your boundaries. But as soon as you break my covenant, I will stop defending your boundaries. Now, let me remind everyone that this is Israel's covenant. This is not the church's covenant. And we don't have the same deal, but they did. So every time God needs to capture the attention of his people because they're breaching the covenant, he does it by means of foreign oppression. So we have this cycle. And I have a diagram in Epic of Eden. I reuse it in the Deborah study, that we start off at basically 11 o'clock, where Israel is living in obedience to the covenant and everything is awesome and they're safe. We will move into the 1 o'clock position where Israel starts drifting from the covenant. 3 o'clock position, Yahweh will send foreign oppression. Might be the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Edomites, the Moabites, who knows? It will be one of these people groups. And that foreign oppression will capture the attention of God's people. They will recognize, we're moving on to 5 o'clock, that they have breached the covenant. They will cry out in repentance and ask for deliverance. 7 o'clock, God will send a deliverer. This is our judge. That judge will unify the people under the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, and both his reputation as a military leader, the tribes will unite, or at least some of the tribes will unite. They will fend off the foreign oppression, and we'll move back into that 11 o'clock slot where everything is awesome. And part of that everything is awesome, which is intriguing to us as well, is that that judge will continue to lead Israel. And now his or her task will be much more that task of judging that we become familiar with. That judge will help to keep the people of God on target with their compliance to the covenant expectations. So that cycle, 12 times.
12 times. So they emerge in a moment of crisis and emergency, but they stick around after that, at least for their lifetime. It's not like a dynasty that gets passed on or anything like that.
No. In fact, it is specifically not dynastic, which makes it different from the monarchy. And also, under the constraints of the Old Covenant, allows a lot of unexpected people to step into that slot because their selection and their empowerment is completely dependent on the Holy Spirit. It's not dependent on the patrilineal nature of Israel's culture. So whereas a king can only be male because he has to be the male heir of his father, and a priest can only be male and must be attached to the tribe of Levi, a judge can come from any corner of Israel. And that's how we wind up with judges like Jephthah, and we wind up with judges like Deborah, who don't fit the standard societal pattern. Yeah. So, and I know that we're headed here, but just to give that overarching view again, we're going to start off really well. We're going to start off in the cycle of Judges with Joshua passing the mantle of leadership onto Othniel. Othniel is just your standard good guy. You know, he's honest, he's of the proper lineage, and he has a pretty quiet time as judge. That's going to be high up there. And we're going to go through a number of judges early on who also are people who are a pretty good character and exactly who you'd expect to step to the forefront. And then we're going to start spinning. And we're going to start spinning into tragic stories like Jephthah, or really morally ambiguous stories like Samson. And as we move through these 12 cycles, what we see is not only this repeating 12 times, but we're also going to see water going down a drain. So that by the time we get to the end of the book, and I know we're headed here too, we're going to have some of the ugliest stories in the Bible, which demonstrate that our people, meaning literally us, God's people, without more direction, are becoming so morally compromised that they are worse than the Canaanites. And that's when we're going to start crashing into this thesis statement of the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. Which, can I say, in Southern California, everybody loves that. You know, you do you, I'll do me. But history kind of proves that that is a recipe for moral chaos. There need to be some guidelines.
Yeah. All right, I want to walk through a few of these judges, and I want to start with one of the early ones, and I feel like I am obligated as both a former youth pastor and the father of a 9-year-old boy to ask you about the story of Ehud and to tell us why it's significant.
You got to love this guy, right? So for your listeners who aren't familiar, what is he, the second, third judge in the sequence? And Ehud is a Benjaminite. So for 18 years, Benjamin has been under the oppression of a Canaanite warlord named Eglon. And Eglon's name literally means calf. Now, the iconography of the Levant, which is our region, Baal rules in this region, and Baal is represented by a bull calf. So there's some overlap here. Yeah, for sure. And when you read the book of Judges, depending on your translation, Eglon is described as being enormous, and that enormous is often interpreted as obese. Yeah, so our hero, Ehud, decides that it is time to take Eglon out. So he straps on what my friend and colleague Lawson Stone has identified as a Nowy 2 Canaanite blade. And it's a very specialized blade. It's made of bronze. It's short. So it's a sword, but a short sword. And Ehud, being a left-handed Benjaminite, the Benjaminites were famous for their left-handed slingers. And with the fortifications of the ancient world, being left-handed was a great advantage, kind of like in professional baseball. If you actually can hit as a left-handed batter, you've got every pitcher off balance, right? So he's a left-handed swordsman. He straps the Nowy 2 to his right thigh. So when he presents himself as a messenger to the great king Eglon, they don't search his right thigh. They look for his weaponry where it normally would be on his left side. So he manages to get an audience with the king. And at the moment that no one expects, he pulls his blade and delivers a mortal blow, probably so deep that he is cutting, this is Lawson Stone again, either the aorta or actually cutting his spinal cord. So it's a masterful work of assassination if you're into that sort of thing. Now, Lawson Stone goes on to argue that Ehud is not obese. He's actually just a boulder of a man. And as a warlord is super intimidating. So as you know the story, our guy Ehud deals his mortal blow, which drops his opponent. He bleeds out in 30 seconds. And then he jumps out a window and runs. The read of what Eglon is up to and where he is, this is where your 9-year-old comes on, is that he's on the toilet. And that's why his people don't interrupt until our guy is out the door. And I said out the window, didn't I?
Yes.
He actually drops out of the internal plumbing of the building. Huh. Kind of a Shawshank Redemption sort of. So there's our guy. And in my study on Deborah, I describe this period as very similar to the Wild West, where the good guys and the bad guys are about this far apart. Yeah. The shootout at the OK Corral, they still haven't determined definitively who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. You know, the sheriffs and the gunslingers, it's every man for himself. And that's really what the settlement period in Israel looked like too.
Yeah.
So it's good reading. And in fact, sorry, last comment, I went through a season with my youngest where she kept telling me that she knew every story in the Bible, and youth group in Sunday school was so boring. So we read the book of Judges together.
They didn't tell those. They didn't necessarily tell those. Let's talk about Deborah. So you've done a study on Deborah, and in my read, she feels like she comes out the best of any of the characters in the book of Judges. So tell us a little bit more about her.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Othniel probably challenges her, but she is, as I say in the study, one of the very few morally unambiguous judges. And I'm an anthropologist. That's half of what I do. And I think about the American story of settling the Wild West. And when did we actually get to the place where we said the Wild West was settled? And the answer was when we started shipping women out on the railways, right? Because women, wives, mothers, they're like, okay, guys, stop killing each other, paint the dining room, put a roof on this house, and plant something already, you know? And Deborah has that persona in the book of Judges. And unlike most of our leaders, she doesn't start her career with a military crisis. She starts her career as a Supreme Court justice, a Sandra Day O'Connor, a Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she, in that career, she's got an itinerant circuit where, and her circuit, by the way, looks just like Samuel's. So we know another unambiguous, morally unambiguous leader here. So she's doing her itinerary on the Benjamin Plain, which is where the bulk of Israelite settlement is, making herself available for court cases that the local elders and leaders can't handle. And she's enforcing the covenant, and she is tough as nails. If you have ever seen two Middle Eastern men argue about anything, a parking spot, water rights, throw in the political arguments, you know that to step in between those guys is to step in between their extended families, their clans, their tribes. There's going to be yelling, things are going to get thrown. And Deborah is on a regular basis stepping between these two guys and telling them who's got the water rights, whose flock gets to go where, who actually has violated the law. Step down, stand back, because I'm the judge. And the fact that she was able to do that in this heavily patriarchal society speaks deeply to her character, her courage, and her anointing. So this is how she starts. We will learn at the end of her story that she judges for a total of 40 years. So I am seeing a 25-year-old. I'm transferring to my world, in her little power suit, getting in her electric car, driving down to her, junior position at the law firm and wowing everyone while she's also trying to launch a family, keep a marriage together, and finish whatever extended training she needs. Because there's no way Deborah could have done that unless she started young. By the time we meet her 15 minutes of fame, and I'm thinking of someone like Jonah. We know he was a prophet in the Northern Kingdom, but we get one story. We know that Deborah leads for 40 years, but we get this one crisis moment where she turns to the tribal leaders and says, we're done. We're done. The Canaanites have held the Valley of Jezreel against us for 20 years. And I am saying, now is the day. We're going to unify and we're going to fight. And I love that about this woman. Which is the big thesis of the study that I do too. I ask three questions over and over again, which is, what territory can you see from where you're standing that belongs in the hands of the people of God, and for whatever reason is not in the hands of the people of God at this moment? Is it worth fighting for? And what are you going to do about it? And that's Deborah. Yeah. That's who she is. So she steps up, she organizes the people, and under Barak's military leadership, she, as commander-in-chief, specifically organizes the tribes of Naphtali and Issachar. But Benjamin shows up. We know that Ephraim shows up. She reams out the tribes that don't show up, and they free the Jezreel. So yeah. I've wandered.
Oh, no, that's good.
Ask me more.
That's good. That's good. Probably the stories that I enjoy the most in Judges are the stories of Gideon. I think there is something about a guy who does not feel qualified and probably is, clearly the underdog. Seeing God work through him is very inspiring. They're great stories. But there's some odd things in those stories. And in particular, a lot of people wonder about this scene where Gideon is trying to figure out, does God actually want me to go and fight this battle? And there's the thing with the fleece, and he puts this fleece out, and whether it's dry or wet is kind of a sign to him of what he should do. Help us make some sense out of that. What does that all mean, and where does that fit in kind of the themes of what's going on?
Yeah, and honestly, one of the things I think about when I read his story is it's something I think about a lot. That on a regular basis, we'll have leaders throughout the biblical story who question God, and God's like, okay, how can I help you believe? And I think about Abraham in Genesis 15, and he says to God, how can I know that this promise is good? And Yahweh shows up in his theophanic splendor and cuts a covenant with Abraham. And I'm like, man, God is doing everything he can to help Abraham believe. And I think about Gideon, and I think, man, God is doing everything he can to help Gideon believe. And then I think about, stories like Zechariah in the New Testament, who doesn't believe when he's in the Holy of Holies
Yeah.
and the angel speaks to him and God slaps him upside the head and says, because you didn't believe, you're going to be mute for the next 9 months. I got to assume that the God who loves us knows enough about the state of our hearts to know when we need the nudge that helps us and when we need the slap across the back of the head. So Gideon gets the nudge. What's he doing? He's got a fleece. And again, the ancient Near East in me wants to tell you that fleece of the Awasi sheep is one of the most valuable trading items out there. And we have got receipts going back to the 4th millennia of the Amorite tribes trading fleece and how valuable that item is. So Gideon's got one. And it could be that he, as a pastoralist, has just done, the shaving of his own sheep. So he's got one available. That's possible. But everyone in the crowd is like, oh, yeah, I know what a fleece is. So what does he do? He puts it out in the morning and he asks completely counter climate wise that there'll be no dew on this fleece. God shows up, does what he asks, and then Gideon reverses the request. Okay, now I want there to be dew on the fleece. And there's so much dew that he wrings it out, and we've got an actual measurable amount of water. So in both of those cases, Yahweh is sitting back going, okay, guy, okay, here's the nudge. I'm on your team. And I love that about the God that I serve. And he gives, like you said, an underqualified guy the nudge he needs. And when we first meet Gideon, he's hiding from the opponents and busy trying to thresh out enough grain to take care of his family in a wine vat, which isn't what you do. You thresh grain up high on a hill where the wind can blow the chaff away, but that's too visible. So instead he's down essentially in a hole, and he rises to the occasion. And again, when his army does show up, when to his great surprise, he stands in front of the tribal leaders and they're like, yeah, we're with you, we're going. And they actually commit their volunteer battalions to his leadership. Then, as you know, he's required to actually strip those battalions down to just this tiny little working force. And yet he wins, which I don't know about you, but I've spent the last 3 decades of my life as a Christian learning the lesson that it doesn't matter how big my opponent is, it matters how big my God is. And maybe one day I'll actually learn that lesson.
I do appreciate that patience that God shows with him. He had made it clear, and he asked again and again, and he does show that patience, which I guess he needed. All right, let's talk about Jephthah. Now we're getting into the ones that really make people uncomfortable. Short version of the story. He makes a vow that if God helps him win a battle, that whatever comes out the door of his house, he's going to offer to God. And when he gets home after the battle, having won, his daughter walks out the door, and he insists, and I think she even kind of insists, he must keep his vow. Now, everything in me says this is really messed up, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. So can you give us some context? Can you give us some understanding of what's happening in this story?
So, first of all, Jephthah is not exactly a model Israelite. He has mixed heritage, and he is rising to leadership because nobody else will, right? That's part of the story. So we're moving down this cycle, and as we step into Jephthah's story, the commentaries would describe his story as one of the tragic ones. First, he gains Israelite allegiance, not easily. He raises the warlords, not easily. He goes out and he commits in battle and he wins. Okay, so he's marching home. And one thing I want to remind your listeners is as we hear these stories, our author is only interested in the leader. So we're thinking in terms that Jephthah is marching home alone. And in reality, he's probably got several hundred men marching with him. Yeah. So as he's marching home, he makes his oath. And there's a lot of folk listening to his oath, which is where his daughter comes in. She's not going to let her father shame himself in front of his men. And he's got that constraint that I made an oath. I made an oath. And the oath was foolhardy. It was premature. So when Jephthah speaks of whatever comes out of his house first, he is likely speaking of his Bet Av, meaning the family compound. And for those of you who've read Epic of Eden, you've actually seen an image of the family compound. You know, that there's a wall that separates the human habitat from the non-human habitat, the fields, the pasturage. And as Jephthah approaches his family compound, where there will be multiple four-room pillared houses, he's expecting an animal to emerge from the family compound. And who knows, maybe a really expensive animal is what he's expecting, and he's going to slaughter that animal and feed his troops and throw a big party. And instead, his beloved only child, his daughter, is leading the dancers in celebration coming out of the family compound. And she's playing her little hand drum, and people are dancing and singing. And I can only imagine that dear God, no moment when Jephthah recognizes that his oath has just collided with the most precious human being in his life. And that collision, as the author gives us, I mean, our narrator, remember, he's living in the Wild West. What he sees is a reckless oath of a not quite fully Israelite leader who has just crashed into the potential of human sacrifice. Now, Israelites do not sacrifice humans. They don't do this. And there's a lot of speculation out there about how Israel evolved away from human sacrifice. John Levinson's got an amazing book, The Death and Resurrection of the Beloved Son, and he makes the argument that they used to actually sacrifice their firstborn children. We've got no anthropological evidence for that at all. We've got, depending on how you read the text, you can, emerge with some sort of argument. The Canaanites sacrificed humans. The Phoenicians definitely sacrificed humans. Israelites don't. So most folk look at that story and make the argument that what Jephthah winds up doing is committing his child to life service at the tabernacle as a virgin. Now, we're like, phew, okay. He doesn't actually slit her throat, yes, but Jephthah has one child. And in a patriarchal, patrilineal, patrilocal society, in committing her to a lifetime of virgin service at the tabernacle, he has just slit his own throat. He will have no offspring. His name will not be remembered in Israel. He will not build a house. And she has just surrendered the ultimate career goal of every woman in the ancient world who wants to marry well, produce children, manage a household, and become a significant and respected member of society. So that is likely the story of Jephthah and his reckless oath.
Yeah. Let me ask just a follow-up question about oaths in particular, because this isn't the first time. It's maybe the most vivid, but it's not the first time we've run into oaths that people felt like they had to keep, even though it, in retrospect, looked like a bad oath. Or maybe even something that would not be something God would want. So the most recent one, when we were reading Joshua, was this oath with the Gibeonites, and the details of the story are not the particular, but the people felt bound to make an alliance with a group of people they were told not to make an alliance with because of an oath. And I can think of a few other examples, but how did oaths function in the ancient world?
So they're serious, as we both know, and a public oath in front of witnesses taken in the name of your deity, you, in oathing, there's a self-imprecatory part of the oath. May thus and such happen to me if I do not do X or Y. And it was a cultural reality, so everyone is living with this perception that you took an oath, you named the name of your God, you can't step away from that. Would the God of the Bible actually feel that way about their oaths? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Could Joshua potentially have stepped away from that oath? I think perhaps he could have. By the way, this is Sandy Richter speaking, not the Holy Spirit. I think potentially he could have, but in his cultural context, he has just signed a contract. Yeah, and not only is his integrity on the line, especially because he's dealing with outsiders, Yahweh's integrity is on the line. So Joshua's oath in particular is almost an evangelistic tool. Jephthah's is even more dicey in my mind. And I think of Abraham and the cave of Machpelah, right? Like he's bargaining to buy this piece of land, and his bargaining partner's like, no, let me give it to you. And he's saying, how dare I take something in the name of Yahweh that hasn't cost me? Okay, these are all cultural norms. I don't see any of those in the book of Deuteronomy, but there is perhaps a lesson to be learned here, that the way we live our lives in our cultural context, the way we display integrity, even though it's not necessarily a part of our holy writ, but it is a part of our cultural norms, still reflects on who our God is. That's the sort of thing I think about as I think through these various stories.
Yeah. All right, let's shift to perhaps the most famous of the judges, the one that is, if you're gonna make it for kids, you're gonna put this big ripped muscle man of a hero. Samson is gonna show up, and even people will maybe have a passing cultural reference to something like Samson and Delilah or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, Samson, when you actually read the story, is vengeful, impulsive.
Mess.
He's awful. He's sleeping around. He's violent. It's it's crazy. And yet God keeps using him. There are these things that God is doing with him that simply do not seem to line up with the kind of man he is. Why does God keep using this guy?
Yeah. So one of my professors at seminary, Gordon Hugenberger, that's Gordon Conwell, and Gordon has retired at this point in time, but I'm sure he'd love to jump on and talk about Samson. He sees Samson as a Christ figure. And I'm like, I can't quite go there. So let's do our 3,000-foot flyover. By the time we get to Samson, we've started moving down the cycle, right? And not only do our judges get more and more morally ambiguous, but they also lead for shorter and shorter periods of time. So this whole system is unraveling. And your narrator wants you to see that this system is unraveling, that the Wild West isn't working, that every man do what is right in their own eyes isn't working, for the 12 tribes to have autonomy isn't working. And we're going to have to do something about that. or the people of God are going to so completely assimilate into the moral code of the Canaanites around them that we're going to lose the story. We're going to lose the story. We're going to lose the bloodline. And that great arc of redemption is going to fail. And that, of course, is going to be the interruption of Samuel standing at the end of this story saying, I'm going to pass my leadership off to a king. We're done with the judges. And that's the larger flyover. And in that flyover, of course, we're going to start with a morally compromised king. And then we're going to have to step up to a man of God's own choosing, who is chosen not for his brawn or for his birth order, but is chosen for his character. That's where we're headed. But while we're dealing with Samson, like you said, we've got this guy who's a hot mess. I mean, he is that standard oldest, only son whose parents let him get away with murder. He's the quarterback of the football team that we're afraid to let alone with the cheerleaders. He's good looking. He's got big muscles. And oh my gosh, what's going on here? There is no part of Samson's story where I want to turn to the young men in my youth group and say, yeah, do that.
Yeah.
Maybe you can help me.
No.
But what does wind up happening is militarily, he winds up dealing several serious blows to the Philistines that push them back within their borders. And if I had a map, I would be showing your readers that our team has landed in the Central Hill Country that runs right down the middle of what we now know as modern Israel. The Philistines have landed on the coast. So think about the Gaza Strip. Think about Tel Aviv. They've landed on the coast. There is a region right in between. So here's the Central Hill Country. Here's the coast. The region running right up in between is called the Shephelah. It's the lowlands, the low hills. All of these stories are happening in the Shephelah, where our team is trying to push down out of the hill country and take control of the promised land, like they were commanded to do. And meanwhile, the Philistines, who are also a recent group of immigrants, are trying to push up into the hill country and take over the land of Israel. And you as the reader, and especially as an ancient reader, are asking the question, who's going to win? Who's going to win? And Samson's victories, for as morally compromised as they are pushing the Philistines back into the coastal plain. So, end of story. I'm with you. This is not a guy I want to elevate, but he does succeed with the ultimate military quest. He is a hero to this Wild West community. He is the Wyatt Earp. He is the Daniel Boone. He is the rifleman, if you're of that generation. Another element about his story that is interesting, and I know you see this, Samson's name comes from the word shamash, which means light, and Delilah's name comes from the word Lila, which means night. So we have a, what is the word I want to use here? Stylized, almost parable-like story of what happens when the light hits the darkness. And what's happening, unfortunately, what should be happening is that light should drive out the darkness. And instead, the darkness is infiltrating light.
Wow. Oh, man. So, not the hero. This is what we know. Well, he's the hero in the sense that he is used for the big purposes that God needs him for, but not as a person to imitate. All right.
I don't think so. You need to find Gordon and interview him.
Yeah, see if he can make the counterclaim. Okay. Yeah. So now we get to the end of the book. And this is the part I actually recently had someone say, I want to give my grandson a Bible, but I realize this is in here, and I'm afraid that he's going to see this story. So, and whether or not the person's going to manage to find their way in there, this is a story that when you come across it maybe the first time, it makes you sick to your stomach. So Judges 19, a Levite he's traveling from Bethlehem. He has picked up his concubine who has cheated on him, run away to her family, but he's bringing her home. And on his way, he stops in a town.
And let me just interject. I'm not sure she's cheated on him.
Okay.
She's gone back to her family of origin. And you and I know enough about the way Israelite society functions that we're like, what? She belongs in her father-in-law's house right now. I would not be surprised if that Levite was such a cruddy husband. That world where divorce is equivalent to getting fired from your partnership in your law firm, she chooses to head home.
Yeah. So this is a runaway for safety, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Yeah. But regardless, he goes and gets her. They're traveling. They stop in a town, and it is a little bit of a repeat of Sodom and Gomorrah. So we've read that, and last year we read that, and so you can pick that up pretty quickly. But it almost gets worse than that story. They are there in the evening. Someone takes them in, but then the men of the city come. They say, we want to assault you. And they give the concubine to the mob. They rape her all night. She's left for dead. And then almost as if it couldn't get worse, he then takes the dead body, chops it up into 12 pieces, and sends it to the tribes of Israel to say, look at this outrageous thing. It is horrifying, disgusting, everything wrong there. And this is kind of the big climactic end to the book. So understandably, people read that and say, what is this doing in my Bible? What am I supposed to get out of this? Help us grapple with this.
Right. So that cycle that we've been describing,
yes.
Right. This is rock bottom. And one thing I think that helps us very much is to think about our narrator. Why is our narrator telling us this story? Why is this the 12th cycle of the book? What is he trying to communicate? And the final answer to that is there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And this is what happens when every man does what is right in his own eyes. This is why we need a law code. This is why we need the covenant, because we as a society are 3 steps away from that. And honestly, we as a society, it would not take a lot to dig up similar stories. I'm thinking of India's Daughter that came out a few years ago, a movie, a documentary about really a very similar rape in India that finally started triggering some pushback on societal views of young women. Okay, so we're in this horrible place, as you've described. And it's a Levite.
Yeah.
So as I ask my students regularly, should a Levite be a good guy or a bad guy? And they're all like, a Levite should be a good guy. And this good guy, as you said, goes to retrieve his wife, talks her father into surrendering her, and they're traveling back home. An additional level of irony is they arrive in Jebusite Jerusalem, because Jerusalem still belongs to the Jebusites. And the sun is dropping, and everyone knows that you stop moving at sunset because it's not safe. And he looks around and he says, no, we're in a Canaanite city. We can't stop here. It's not safe. So they push on past sunset until they get into Benjaminite territory. Our guy thinks he's safe, plops down in the city square, and expects, according to Middle Eastern hospitality, one of the Benjaminites to invite him into his home with his travel companions. And no one does. Instead, a foreigner comes in from the fields, and says, hey, dude, you can't spend the night here. It's not safe. And our Levite says, well, we're in Benjamin. It's going to be fine. He's like, no, it's not safe. Come into my home. So the foreigner invites the Israelite into his home because Benjaminite territory is not safe. And you're like, whoa. Now the next scene, as you have described, the Benjaminites just like the Sodomites, start pounding on our foreigner's front door saying, throw that man out here. We want to have relations with him. And Clayton, anytime the Bible makes a parallel to Sodom or Gomorrah, you know that your narrator is trying to tag in to the ugliest thing possible. It's like when a politician starts talking about Hitler. Everyone knows, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And it's the Benjaminites. So they pound. The foreigner is like, no, brothers, don't do this thing. Take my daughters, which is horrible. And they're like, no, we don't want your daughters. We want that man. And then our Levite says, don't everybody get upset here. Don't get your panties in a wad or whatever, the current idiom would be. He says, take my wife. And he throws her out the door. And we're appalled. We're all appalled. The narrator is appalled. And then the narrator goes on to explain to us that she is gang raped all night. She crawls back to the house and she dies with her hand on the threshold. Michelle Knight of TEDS has a beautiful article on this about the parallels between the hand in the darkness in the Sodom and Gomorrah story and how the angels use their hands in the darkness to deliver Lot, and how the hand in the darkness in this story, God just steps back and says, let your own evil consume you. So the guy gets up in the next morning. When I'm teaching this story, my point is always, this man slept. He gets up in the morning, he opens the front door, he steps over her body, throws it up on his donkey, rides home, and as you said, cuts her into 12 pieces, slaps a Post-it note on each piece, and sends it out to the 12 tribes. So what is the purpose of that dismemberment of a human being? And the best treatment I have ever read is that what the Levite is doing is reenacting the covenant moment when an animal is cut up and the weaker party walks between those cut animal pieces and says, let what has happened to this animal happen to me if I break my oath. And what this Levite is communicating is, we have broken our oaths. We are not who we claim to be. This is not the behavior of the people of Yahweh. And here are the body parts of my wife to demonstrate it. And it becomes a call to war, and all of the tribes unify to go after Benjamin for this great crime. So a moment for a political commercial here. We're going to answer this gross act of violence with more violence. We're going to answer this gross act of violence of annihilating this family and this woman by trying to annihilate the tribe of Benjamin. And if you've read the rest of the book, it doesn't work, and it's horrible, and there's a slaughter, and everybody, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess, as the nation of Israel has just spiraled into this rock bottom moment, and everyone is sitting there reading the book of Judges saying, is it over? Is the promise of Abraham done? Will the people of God survive this? What is Yahweh going to do? And the answer is, he's going to raise up Samuel, who's going to raise up David, who's going to get some reins. And I'm thinking of if you've ever been on a horse that's out of control, rein this in until we can get back to the storyline. And it's very, very dark. And I can understand why your parishioner and friend might not have wanted his 9-year-old reading the story.
Yeah. So the book of Judges ends in a very dark place on purpose. And so we get this, we need something that comes next. Now, depending on what order of, the books are in different canons and whatever, right. Sometimes the next thing you get is the story of Samuel and David. But in the English one, it's very interesting that the book of Ruth comes there, which, happens contemporaneously as a similar time. but it is a
Right.
very different feel. So I would love for us, and that part of the reason we're reading Ruth immediately after Judges is because there is in some way a sense where Ruth is an answer to some of the question that's going
Yes.
on here.
Absolutely.
I'd love to walk through the beats in Ruth for a little bit here,
Mm-hmm.
and have you unpack some of that. So for those who are listening, this may feel like a little bit of a shift, but I don't think it is. Let's start at the beginning with Ruth and Naomi. Help us understand what's going on right here at the opening of the book with these two women who have lost their husbands and they're figuring out what to do next.
Yeah. And just to support what you do, this might seem incongruent, but the book of Ruth opens with the statement, now it came about when the judges, ruled. So
Yeah.
I'm totally with you here. Clayton, this is an answer to the book of Judges. And it is, so many things I love about the answer. One, we're in the same period. We're in the settlement. The people of God are barely making it. We've got moral chaos, and we're tucked away in this tiny little 2-horse town. And that's what Bethlehem is. In fact, we don't even have evidence that it was walled during this era. I mean, it is Victorville, California. It is East Kneecap, Kansas, right? And in this tiny little town, during the same period when a woman is not safe traveling with her own husband in the tribal territories of Israel, that we're going to have two women who are completely without protection, who wind up rescued based on the unique and exceptional character of two people in this book. And you and I both know that both Ruth and Boaz are going to be described here as people of Chayil. And I love that. I'm actually working right now on a presentation on the Proverbs 31 woman. There are only 3 places in the entire Bible where someone is described as a man or a woman of Chayil. And it's Proverbs and the ideal woman, and the Moabitess Ruth and her redeemer Boaz. So in this very, very dark period, we have got two women who, it starts off with Naomi. Naomi is actually the lead character. And in standard Israelite fashion, Naomi has been married to a man named Elimelech. They live in Bethlehem. They're farmers. They've got a tiny little farm. They're barely keeping it together. And famine strikes. Climactically, Israel experiences a drought about every 7 years, and it's probably one of these cycles. But this time, Elimelech, with his limited resources, is not able to recover. And usually that means that there's been a drought that has repeated. So the first drought kills this year's crop. The second drought kills the seed that was kept in the barn. And the third drought is going to kill us. And so Elimelech makes a very difficult decision to leave his inherited property, his patrimony, and decides to take his little family and head across the river into foreign territory, Moab. Israelites don't like Moabites, by the way. This is the Costa Rican, Nicaraguan kind of thing. This is the Palestinian, Israeli kind of thing. Russian, Ukrainian kind of thing. They don't like each other. And he heads over to Moab to try to find some land to farm and see if he can keep body and soul together. They get to Moab and they're doing okay. And the boys grow up. So Naomi's got 2 young adult sons. She's got a husband. Life is okay. And she loses her husband, which is a big deal and very sad. But in this society, she's still got 2 young adult sons, so she's okay. Because a woman in this world is her father's daughter, her husband's wife, or her son's mother. So she's her son's mother. She's still got her links to the economy and the legal system. She marries her boys to Moabite women. Not perfect, but not bad. Grandbabies can't be too far away. This all happens in the first paragraph of the book. And then the boys die, and they die without babies. And so every Israelite reader is like, whoa, this is as bad as it gets. She is hundreds of miles from any kin. She's got 2 daughters-in-law to whom she cannot offer any other sons for marriage. She doesn't have a husband. She doesn't have a father. She doesn't have a son. This woman is a widow's widow. Mm. And what will happen from this point forward will demonstrate the exceptional character of Ruth and then the exceptional character of our man Boaz. Do you want me to keep rolling?
Oh, yeah. Keep going. So
okay.
They go back to Israel. Well, let's get to this part.
Right.
So they come back, and but there's a fork in the road here for the wives of her sons, Ruth and her sister, so
right.
or sister-in-law.
Right.
Tell us about that moment there.
Yeah. So the girls are in the exact same position that Naomi is. They have been transferred to another Bet-Av, another household, so they belong to their father-in-law. He's their legal economic representative. He's dead. Now they've lost their husbands, and they have no children. So they are also widows, and you could describe them as orphans. So Naomi looks into the eyes of her daughters-in-law, who apparently they have a good relationship. You can tell by the exchange. And she says, girls, I have got absolutely nothing to offer you. I know by legal convention, I should offer you another son so that you can stay in my household and we can all raise up children in the name of my husband, my deceased husband. But I've got no sons. I've got no husband, so I have no hope of more sons. And let's say, miraculously, I got a new husband tonight, and miracle number 2, I got pregnant tonight, and miracle number 3, I actually managed to deliver sons at my advanced age. Are you going to wait 20 years until those boys grow up? Of course not. The only hope we have here is for you two to go back to your kin and go back to your mother's house. I love this. Because, see, the father's house is a legal entity. And Naomi knows that there is no law that protects them. And so she says, no, go back to your mamas. And I'm a mama. Go back to your moms. And your moms will advocate for you with their husbands and their sons. And hopefully they will be able to find you a place within the Bet-Av of origin, and someone will find you another husband, and there's hope for you. There's hope for you. For me, there's no hope. So don't call me Naomi, which means sweetness, pleasantness. Call me Mara, which means bitterness. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take the only choice available. I'm going to travel all to Israel, extended that's on my home, and give me your property, and someone going to feed me. That's the only hope I have. So Ruth, standing in front of their little house that Naomi is packing up and heading home, she stands there and she says, I know that every law and every legal tradition that we have states that I no longer belong to you, Naomi, but I don't care. She says, no. She says, I'm not going back to my mother's house. Rather, Naomi, where you go, I will go. Where you live, I will live. Your God will be my God. And where you die, I will be buried. And then she takes the oath. May all the evils I know of fall upon my shoulders if anything but death separates me from you.
Wow.
I love this moment because of the integrity that this young woman is showing. She knows that Naomi is at the end of her rope, and she's not going to leave. That declaration that Ruth makes, we use it in weddings. That's kind of okay. But in reality, what it is the most forthright declaration of kinship allegiance we probably have in our entire Bible. Because Every one of those claims is what a kinsman says to the other. I'm going to live in your bed. I'm going to be buried in your family too. My life is your life. Your life is life. And other in a traditional tribal society. So Ruth packs up her life. She goes back with Naomi. So we have two ultimate widows. They are the most elaborate picture of a widow we also have in our Bibles. They have no one. And on top of that, and I champion this in the Ruth study that I do, when Ruth steps into that little town, okay, think little rural town in, I don't know, northwest Alabama. Everyone knows each other. Everyone's grown up with each other. Everyone has the same accent. Everyone wears the same clothes. And here we have a young Moabite woman who steps into this town with the wrong accent, the wrong dialect, the wrong clothes. And she's probably also a little too pretty. And so as I see that welcome with Naomi, where all the women of Bethlehem come running out to throw their arms around Naomi and to welcome her home. And they're like, but Naomi, where's Elimelech? Where are the boys? What's happened? And they hear Naomi's sad story. I see Ruth standing in the background with her hands folded in front of her, her head down. And it's only halfway through that greeting where all these women are like, and who's she? And what is she doing here? So Ruth is not going to receive a warm welcome. She immediately is going to get up the next morning. She's going to take access to the gleaning law. She's going to get out there and work her butt off for her and her mother-in-law. And Boaz, who's going to show up in a moment as the wealthy landlord, who's also described as a person of Chayil. Who knows? Maybe he's a retired military man, because Chayil is typically a word for character and military quest, but it also can be a word for wealth and nobility. He's going to have to tell his young men twice to keep their hands off her. She's got no societal defense. But over the course of this story, our little Moabite is going to demonstrate so much character, so much integrity, such a work ethic, that by the time we get to chapter 3, and she actually has the audacity to propose to Boaz, he's going to say yes. And he, as an older man of great influence, is going to protect her good name, protect Naomi's well-being. He's going to redeem. I use him as a major example of what redemption means in our old covenant. Take her into his household, accomplish the levirate law on her behalf, give her a child for Elimelech's clan, and then keep her under his roof as his wife with heirs. And of course, Naomi, she gets the in-law apartment. So as we look at this story, we do see the foil to the book of Judges. Because in the book of Judges, we hear violence after violence against the helpless, the marginalized, the women of that story. And so, as in Judges 19, an Israelite girl is not safe on the streets of her own hometown in Bethlehem because of the integrity and the character of a few good men. We wind up with a Moabitess, not only safe on the streets of Bethlehem, but incorporated into the great story of redemption. So it's a beautiful story about what a little bit of integrity can do for the people of God.
Yeah. All right. There are two cultural things that I'd love to ask you about that I think are going to be helpful for people reading this book. The first is in that opening scene where we encounter Boaz, and Ruth goes to his field and is allowed to just pick stuff out of his field. So why don't you help us understand this idea of gleaning and what that would have meant for Ruth, what Boaz was doing by allowing her to do that?
Yeah. So one of the supports and defenses for the widow and the orphan, the marginalized in the land of Israel, was this right to glean. So the deal is that a landowner, when he was harvesting, had to allow these folks who are on the margins to follow after his harvesters and pick up whatever was left over. So Deuteronomic law specifically engages the three big crops, which is grain, uh, grapes, viticulture, and olives, and specifically commands the Israelite farmer that you are not allowed to go back over your fields, back over your vineyard, back over your orchard a second time. Rather, you need to leave the rest of that crop for the poor, the marginalized, the Levite among you. So that's what Ruth is doing. She's taking advantage of what we would see as, kind of a welfare sort of law, that this type of work and the proceeds of this kind of work belong only to the marginalized. So she's taking advantage of that, which is why she's following after the harvesters. And we can imagine that Boaz has hired a small army of young men and young women to cut the grain, bundle the grain, drag the grain off the field. And she is gleaning through the barley harvest, which comes first, and then the wheat harvest. So for 6 weeks, she's out there gathering grain.
And by Boaz doing this, he's essentially saying, I'm going to protect her. I'm going to provide for her the way we were supposed to. It's the inverse of what we've been talking about in these vulnerable situations where someone's coming through town and people are supposed to have sort of the basic level of decency to say, I'm going to welcome you in. In this case, Boaz is kind of doing what he's supposed to be doing, but it's very countercultural to say, I see your vulnerability. I'm going to let you come in my field and faithfully let you do this. Now, the other part I want to ask you about is that... go ahead.
Let me just add in, the business of him letting her glean would have been, yes, he's doing what he's supposed to be doing, so we're seeing that he is a man of character, but he takes the additional step where he commands his young men not to mess with her. Now, think about our own communities, right? Are we willing to give away our resources to our people, right? To the members of our church, to people we recognize? Yeah, more than likely. Are we willing to give away our resources to people who look like us? Yeah, probably. But when we start encountering people who, for whatever reason, we have decided are morally compromised themselves, maybe not. And the Moabites in Israel's world have a reputation for being unethical people themselves. So the fact that he lets a foreigner take advantage of the gleaning laws, the fact that he tells his young men, hands off, twice, and then when he invites her into the lunch tent, oh my gosh. And then he, the big boss man, basically sits down next to her and hands her a plate of food from, the joint buffet table. He's going way above and beyond the call of duty.
Yeah. Yeah. The other cultural thing going on here is something about redemption. You alluded to that before.
Yes.
We have a very spiritual idea of redemption kind of lodged in our head, but this was something very concrete and tangible that we're talking about when you say that he was a redeemer in this situation. Can you explain what that would mean?
Yeah, so the verb redemption grows out of the traditional tribal culture that Israel had. And in their culture, the oldest living male is the protector and the authority figure of every extended family. So that's why it's such a big deal that Naomi's husband, Elimelech, has died and died in a foreign land and died when their family farmland is up for grabs. He has left them completely destitute. And then the fact that the girls' husbands have died, oh my gosh, there is no kinship circle here to step in and take care of these people. Um, keep in mind that there is no welfare, no Medicaid, no Medicare, no SNAPs, no disability, no unemployment insurance. None of these things exist. They're in kinship circle or it's nothing. So for this is why Naomi and Ruth are in such dire straits. So how is this supposed to work? The way it's supposed to work is that the oldest living male is supposed to step in, and if there is a crisis, that oldest living male is supposed to redeem. And that verb means I put my checkbook on the table to buy your land back. I offer you my next oldest son so that you have a husband and you can have an heir. I open up my home and I welcome you into it. Well, Naomi's got none of these things. So as the story progresses and she realizes that Ruth is in Boaz's field, Naomi points out the fact that Boaz is a relative. He's a redeemer. Now, as we'll learn, he's not the closest relative. He's not the one who societally actually has the responsibility to step up and buy back Elimelech's land and make sure that Ruth gets married and make sure that Naomi has food. He's not the guy, but he's within the family circle. And this is where Boaz's unique character steps up. Just like Ruth said, I know the laws and traditions do not make you my responsibility, Naomi, but I'm making you my responsibility. Boaz steps up and says the exact same thing. There's another guy in line ahead of me, and he might want the land because the land is very valuable. So I've got to deal with the law. In fact, Boaz is clearly much more sophisticated in this conversation than Naomi is. I've got to deal with the law. I've got to deal with the land. But I swear to you, he takes an oath, I'm going to make sure you two are okay. So for him to step up in the city gate and say, okay, there's a bit of land here. You are the closest relative. I'm interested in it, but you have first dibs. As you see in the story, that other relative goes, oh, yeah, I want that land. Of course he wants that land. Land is wealth. Land is security. So now Boaz does what I think is not the law, but it's like a really smart business move. And he says in front of all of the elders, oh, okay, well, when you take the land, by the way, there's this case of Ruth the Moabitess. You'll need to bury her too. And the guy's like, oh, no. I don't want another wife. I don't want any more children. I don't want any more responsibility. I don't want this land if I have to give it away to Elimelech's heir. And besides that, she's a Moabite. And so he steps away from the table and Boaz says, okay, I'll redeem. And honestly, I think within Israelite law and certainly societal tradition, that man could have gotten away with taking Elimelech's land without taking Ruth. He might have wound up with responsibility for Naomi, but probably not Ruth. And so for Boaz, whose name means strength, yeah, he's got a stud name, as my husband would say, to step in and take over this situation is just a mark of great integrity, great sacrifice. And as a result, if you've read the book of Matthew recently, or you've read the genealogy in Luke, you see that Boaz, Obed, his levirate son, and Jesse, the grandson, all get named because it's this act of integrity that sets the stage for the solution to the era of the judges. And his name is David.
That's pretty great. All right. I want you to help us bring all this home and tell us how, as we're talking about Judges and Ruth now, how this connects with us. So whether, we're New Testament believers not living in an ancient world where some of these things are going on. This is not our step in the story, but how does this connect with us both in terms of spiritual relevance or practical relevance?
So as we think about these narratives that have been entrusted to us as the people of God, why have they been entrusted to us? Well, in the book of Judges, what do we learn? We learn 12 times that when the people of God do not keep the covenant of God, really bad stuff happens. that we become corrupt, that we spin out of control, and that God is not able to bless us in our rebellious and messed up state. We definitely learn that. When we step into the book of Ruth, we learn how the integrity of two private members of the kingdom of God can change things. So as we compare these two stories, again, pausing over our own political moment, one thing that comes screaming through to me is that in the book of Judges, the failure is the failure of leadership, right? The judges are failing. The tribal sheikhs are failing. The people who have power and authority are not using it as they ought to for the sake of the kingdom. So where does that leave the regular citizen? It leaves the regular citizen looking at these leaders saying, if you guys don't get your act together, I got no hope here. There's nothing I can do to turn this story. I don't have that kind of power and authority. And then we turn to the book of Ruth, and we see one man and one woman. The woman has absolutely no influence, no resources, no societal standing. She's nothing. He has got societal influence and wealth, a tiny little backwater town, no control over whatever central government Israel might have. But these two in their personal integrity and adherence to the covenant, they turn the story. So that honestly, Clayton, gives me a little hope right now.
Yeah.
In the 21st century of the United States of America, where I see moral chaos on my newsfeed. Yeah. I see moral chaos on my social media. What do? Well, I can shout back. I can choose more violence in the name of violence. I can try to influence my political representatives, and I might completely fail on all of those fronts. But what if I live my own life with a kind of integrity that Ruth and Boaz demonstrated? Is it possible that in the mustard seed that is the kingdom of God, that you and I can actually turn the tide?
Wow.
Maybe.
That is a cool thought to end on. Dr. Richter, thank you so much for being with us. Before we go, where can we find more of your work?
Well, first of all, it is delightful to be with you. I finally have a website.
Hey!
It took a computer science TA and a publisher hounding me to death. So sandyrichter.org, you can at least find representation of all the stuff I've done. I also have launched a public-facing Facebook page, so anyone can get on there and ask a question or check in on my speaking engagements or what I'm publishing this week. When it comes to these two topics that we've been talking about, I would encourage folks to check out my HarperCollins biblical study curriculum on Deborah and the Book of Judges. The subtitle is Unlikely Heroes. And I also have a study on Ruth that's with Seedbed. So those are places that people can find more of what I do.
Well, I would encourage everybody to check it out. I hope this conversation has been good for you, getting excited about reading Judges and Ruth. Over the upcoming weeks here on the Bible Savvy podcast, Pastor Courtney, Pastor David, and I, we are going to be doing our usual thing, discussing passages from our readings each week, and we'll be digging deeper into some of these stories. So hope you'll join us each Monday for that.
Thanks for hanging out with us. Join us again next Monday for a new episode where we'll be looking at another passage from the Bible Savvy reading schedule. And in the meantime, if you're not following along with the reading plan, check out BibleSavvy.com. Also, you can subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. Email us your questions or suggestions at podcast@BibleSavvy.com. Lastly, tell your friends, and we'll talk to you next week.